Black 2 and White 2 was a really unique situation for Pokemon, the first and only direct numbered sequels in the series. We're talking completely new events, brand new features, a new story mode, and an expanded region, all developed in the middle of Game Freak's transition to Generation 6, which was arguably the most dramatic leap in the series' history. So how did they pull this off? Well, that's what we're looking at today. First off, huge shout out to MD Travis. He's the guy who's compiled almost every prototype build from Generations 5 through 6, and without his additional insight, this video wouldn't have been possible. And if you guys enjoy these type of stories, don't forget to show your support by subscribing to the channel. With that being said, let's get into it. Our story actually begins during the development of the original Black and White. Even though program development for BW2 didn't officially kick off until after the release of BW1, some ideas that eventually ended up in the sequels seem to have been tested much earlier. The earliest case of this dates back to July 2009 with the Castelia sewers. For those who don't know, Castelia sewers was an area exclusive to BW2, but this was initially planned for BW1. You can actually see an early entrance near the docks that would have led into the sewers. Keep in mind, the location of the entrance is different from where it ended up in the sequels. At this stage, the sewer interior was just a simple house template, which was common for Gen 5 development. Then in September and December 2009, we even saw slight tweaks to the sewer entrance design, before it was ultimately removed at the end of December. Strangely though, the interior data stuck around, and in early 2010, it was even modeled into a placeholder sewer layout, with indicators for 3 different floors. It's unclear whether the team planned to rework the entrance back in and actually include it in BW1, or if a developer just didn't get the memo that it was cut. Either way, on March 27, the sewer interior was ultimately removed from BW1. Another example of sequel concepts sneaking into the original comes from May 14, 2010. Up until this point, Black and White featured a beta Kyurem sprite, one you may have seen before. The design looked radically different to the final version. But on May 14, Kyurem received its final design and was actually given 2 different placeholder forms. Remember, this is still during BW1 development, and already we're looking at evidence of multiple Kyurem forms. This also happens to be the same day that the Reshiram and Zekrom sprites were finalized, losing their red and blue color tones. And just a week later on May 25th, both Kyurem forms were removed in favor of a single final design, and that's also when it got its animation. It's fair to assume that Game Freak originally considered introducing 2 Kyurem forms in BW1, but sometime during that week, they decided it'd be better to save them for the sequels. As far as we know, those are the only clear examples of BW2 concepts being tested in BW1. Development for the original Black and White wrapped up with its release on September 18, 2010, and just a couple weeks later on October 1st, Swan officially branched off from the original Black and White project, the same day that X and Y began development. Important to note that actual development for BW2 began on October 5th, likely because they spent the first days of October focused on setting up X and Y. But essentially this means both X and Y and BW2 began development at the same time and were being developed at the exact same time. To weave some history together, in those early weeks of October, it seems like X and Y was more of a priority. After all, it was Game Freak's first 3D Pokemon game. Despite this, BW2 still saw some progress. On October 28th, a static 3D Kyurem model was added to the title screen. Though it still carried Black 1 branding at the time. This was the first addition to BW2. Then just a few days later, the BW2 logo was officially added to the title screen, and the Kyurem model was given a small animation. A small step, but huge in the grand scheme of the project. Throughout November, the game was still just Black and White with a new label slapped on it. The first few months was spent mostly on improving the engine and backend systems, while X and Y early development remained a strong priority for Game Freak. But on November 15, BW2 finally received its first gameplay feature, the updated title cards. By December 3rd, Black and White 1 events were still present in the game, but at the same time, this would also be the last time we'd see BW1 intact inside the BW2 project. Because by December 14, everything was wiped. Every NPC, every scripted event, the entire story mode was gone. Castelia City literally became a ghost town. Almost all of Unova was emptied out, with one exception, Nimbasa City. You see, the Nimbasa gym was the first new location worked on for BW2. At this point, the old design had been scrapped, and what we had was the rough foundation of a new one, very unfinished. You couldn't even exit the building. Early December also gave us the greatest programmer art of all time, an extremely rough early version of a BW2 gym intro, but by the 14th, that same battle interface was basically complete. Just 2 days later, Nimbasa gym had received its full design. Textured, scripted, and playable. It wasn't fully complete yet, but this was indeed the first brand new area built for Black 2. The rest of December was spent polishing it further. Lights were added, then synced to the music, and so on. Behind the scenes though, the real focus was on prepping the game's engine for January, setting the stage for the sequels to actually come together. Rolling into the new year, January 6 brought the first signs of updated wild encounters. This system would go on to get 31 different revisions over the course of development. This was also when the project started to take big strides. A base for Aspertia City was added to the game, though it looked very different to the final version. In fact, it matched the concept art layout, which you may or may not be familiar with. After all these years, it's amazing to see a version of it in-game. Data for the other maps were also added in. Flocessy Town and Lentimas Town borrowed Lekunosa Town's layout, while Virbank City and Humilau City were using Sprite City. Overall, Game Freak was kicking off 2011 in a big way. By January 11, Castelia Gym's layout had been updated. Here's some cool shots using the 3D camera, as provided by MD Travis. Around this time, we also see some strange unused battle intro effects. One of them almost looks like an alternate shiny animation. Very unusual. By the end of January, BW2's visuals began diverging slightly from BW1. Each season now had slight differences compared to the first game, the field patches were also fixed, and Aspertia City's design had shifted significantly, pivoting away from the concept art design. Virbank City also received its first original layout, which also looked slightly different to the final. As you're seeing right now, the extended dock, which is completely absent in the final game, and just minor differences throughout the city. Flocessy Town also got its first unique design. I noticed some elements carried over into the final, but the layout was completely different. Despite probably using the same amount of surface area, I really prefer how the final version made use of the space instead. It feels way bigger. Route 19 was also much smaller and much simpler at this stage. Meanwhile, Lentimas Town and Humilau City still hadn't been touched yet. Just over a week later, the final sprite sheet for Nate was added, along with an early version of Rosa's sprite. Nate actually went through 3 revisions in total. The first 2 were just placeholders, including Hilbert with a little swan icon, and then just squares with numbers. By February 9, work on battle backgrounds had begun. Aspertia City now matched its final layout almost perfectly, down to the fine details. On Valentine's Day, seasonal textures were added to the new cities. Interestingly, the lookout area was extended in this build. Maybe they were experimenting with features like sitting on benches, which would later appear in X and Y. And the final Nate sprite wouldn't actually appear in gameplay until February 17. On February 19, Aspertia City saw more refinement, along with some experiments with a view from the lookout point. And the very next day, the updated Unova map appeared in game for the first time. It actually featured quite a lot of differences, as I'm highlighting right now. Flocessy Town then received a huge update, nearly its full final design. Virbank City was now surprisingly fully textured and pretty much complete, making it the first city in Black 2 and White 2 to reach that stage. By March 4th, we saw the first real progress on the Pokémon World Tournament. The interior had been added, though it was still just placeholder tiles, and the NPCs just looped dialogue, though the tournament area itself had been laid out. Around the same time, debug scenarios now started you in Aspertia City, while the normal intro still played out in November Town, just with Nate swapped in. New areas were also finally linked to interiors and the greater Unova map, meaning you could enter every building. This was also when the Unova Pokedex received a small cosmetic update, shifting from green to its final red color scheme. By March 9, the stairs in Aspertia City were complete, though the lookout area was still extended. I do like that from here you could see the opposite side of the gate and quite a bit of Route 19. The same day, we also saw the beginning of reinventing the cut Castelia sewers into BW2. Unfortunately, this would be the last change before development hit a sudden halt 2 days later. On March 11th, the devastating Tohoku earthquake struck Japan, a nationwide disaster with effects that even reached the Pokemon franchise. Not only did it pause BW2's development for a whole 10 days, it also directly impacted the anime, causing 2 episodes to be permanently scrapped. Game Freak returned to BW2 development on March 21st, but only a single bug fix was made that day, and development would resume as normal the following day. By March 23rd, work on the Castelia sewers layout picked back up. Compared to BW1, this was a much larger, more complex design. It's kinda surreal to think just how much history is now added to this map, considering this was one of the main focuses around the earthquake time. It's fascinating to think how this design may have been indirectly influenced by the events through a butterfly effect. Then on March 25th, something very strange happened. Every single building in Unova turned into rocks. No kidding, the exteriors were replaced with giant rocks, though you could still interact with them. I tried loading in and out of a map, as that would usually fix any issues, but it was definitely still just rocks, and this was the case in every city. I don't know if it was a glitch, engine tweaking, or even something deep connected to the earthquake here, but I personally haven't seen anything like this on a region-wide scale at any other point in development, and I can't think of any other logical reason for this. Let me know your theories in the comments. Important to note that all the buildings were back to normal by the end of March. Moving into April, development shifted gears. April 6 was an important day for BW2 because this was when the entrance to the Castelia sewers was officially re-added, in the same place we see in the final game. April 8 would be the final day of setup for BW2 because on the very next day, work began on the story mode, and April 9 came in strong with a massive update to the game. The opening sequence of the game was now implemented, even with details like Bianca's updated sprite in place. However, the starter picking cutscene was ripped straight from BW1. Rival Hugh was present here too, but he used End's sprite as a placeholder, and his battled sprite was Lucas. Yeah, Lucas was still being used as a placeholder. By April 15, Aspertia City had coded in many of the NPCs and many events. The story carried you all the way to the Herdier event in Flocessy Ranch, Throughout the rest of April, the Pokémon World Tournament interior was updated even further, and we get a glimpse of the mode itself. Here's the trainers from the old tournament. The rival introduction cutscene also saw tweaks, and the lookout view in Aspertia City was finally readjusted to its final design. Then came April 28, another big day in the timeline. This was when Game Freak began work on Pokestar Studios. 2 scenarios were added, both using the same movie-style presentation and mechanics, but one of them featured a completely unique battle background. I'm not too familiar with Pokestar, but this is the most detailed Generation 5 backdrop I've ever seen. That same day also marked the first progress on Lentimas Town and Humilau City. Lentimas already had some groundwork, while Humilau was nothing more than a blank grid, though still linked to the greater Unova map. Heading into mid-2011, it seems like the focus pendulum swung firmly back to Black 2 and White 2 over X and Y. Fast forward just over a month to June 1st, and BW2 had taken huge leaps. For starters, work on the Pokestar Studio's map had begun, starting with an interactable gate. And in general, it's almost like the devs started having fun with just adding stuff to the game, especially with multiple revisions to Pokestar, or even just adding expansive routes. You start to see the cities flesh out with detail, almost like Game Freak were flexing their knowledge and improvements within the Gen 5 engine, almost like they had more development time than they needed, which is an incredible contrast to later generations. By this point, Flocessy Town was fully textured and almost complete, with some NPCs even having full dialogue. Meanwhile, another building had this. Seriously, why are they using Kyurem as a placeholder NPC sprite? Lentimas town was also close to finished and looking fantastic. Humilau city finally had some structure, though given it's one of the biggest cities in Unova, it makes sense that it was saved for last. Virbank city was also fully done at this point, complete with its music, though Roxy still used a placeholder sprite. Most of the gyms had their puzzles and designs complete too, like Castelia city. The exterior of the old Sprite gym hadn't yet been updated, but the interior was now a void, ready for the redesign. And interestingly, if you had started a new game in this build, you'd now be dropped straight into Aspertia city, with a Professor intro cutscene now completely removed. Then we reached June 8, which I like to call my birthday build. By this point, the earliest version of the Aspertia city music had been added to the game. Speaking of the Aspertia city music, it actually went through multiple revisions, almost like Game Freak couldn't make up its mind for a while, and we're talking months. This was also when the updated Driftveil city had been fully textured and finished up. On June 23rd, the sprites for Black Kyurem and White Kyurem were finally added to the game. Black Kyurem sprite even had some slight differences compared to the final version. By June 28th, one of BW2's biggest features was added in, the Unova link key system, which let you adjust the game's difficulty. At this stage, the menu looked very different. 2 days later, on June 30th, Roxy received her final sprite and animation. Humilau city exteriors were added, and later story events had been fleshed out even more. The Castelia sewers also had their layout completed. Interestingly, Pokestar Studios and the complex dungeon ended up being the very last of the new maps to be fully implemented, both of which were never linked to the greater Unova map. By July 16, I spot HUGH'S sprite for the first time. Strangely enough, he was all the way up in Humilau city. Pokestar Studios itself still didn't exist as a proper map at this point, and it wouldn't be until August that we'd see the creation of a map. Keep in mind, Pokewood was not a scrapped name, it's just the Japanese name for Pokestar Studios. As highlighted by MD Travis, the best part about the map at this stage is that the surfing bug towards the east existed ever since the map was first added. In general, Pokestar Studios became a focus over the summer months. As you're seeing right now, I think it's clear that they really cared about this mode, and the fact it took so long to even add the Pokestar Studios map, how much went into creating the mode, and just how much content the mode offered, just goes to show how they viewed it as BW2's cherry on top, similar to how the animated sprites were for BW1. And I think it's a shame the mode is not talked about more, because the sheer amount of polish and creativity that went into it is wild. Even I didn't realize how deep it went until researching this timeline. By the end of August, the bottom screen UI was finalized, and Humilau Gym was complete, fully modeled and textured inside and out. Though the actual gym battle still wasn't implemented, but this basically marked the end of work on gym interiors. Moving into September, on the 10th, Aspertia City's lookout finally received its signature camera lift, potentially a remnant of an idea they had earlier in development, and they used clever lighting tricks to give the background more depth. By September 23rd, the Professor's cutscene had been re-implemented and tweaked to match BW2's style. The updated character art was finally added as well. It feels like Game Freak weren't sure where to take the intro for the longest time, which I kinda get cause it's the same professor. Around the same time, Pokestar Studios was finally linked to the Unova map, now playable in story mode and looking almost identical to its final design. Game Freak also began touching up the post-game, including work on End's updated castle, while a number of leftover BW1 locations were updated to match the BW2 design. And by October 2011, after months of iteration, the World Tournament mode was complete. In the lead up to this moment, Game Freak had experimented with shorter cutscenes, but from this point onward, the only real changes were adding in the proper tournaments with the finalized trainer rosters. October also saw the addition of early battle introductions for sequel exclusive characters, and by October 22nd, the long-awaited moment finally came. HUGH'S sprite was finally implemented into the story. Absolutely huge. Elite 4 content had also been finalized by this time. Just a few days later, on October 25th, the starter choice cutscene was added. On November 21st, they began work on the 3D cutscenes, at first using placeholder images, but the very next day we got our first real visuals of these scenes. And by November 28th, all 3 of the major sequences had been added. By November 30th, the events for Humilau City were wrapped up, officially marking the completion of a final city in Unova. With that milestone, every major location on the map was finally complete. Moving into December, the finishing touches began. By December 13th, the opening cutscene for the game had been implemented, along with a polished version of a starter cutscene. I don't think it's ever been noted, but I'm 99% sure that this cutscene was influenced from X and Y style, considering that was also deep into development at the same time. By Christmas Day, most of the wild encounter rates and final habitat data had been implemented, and just one day later, the final title screen branding was added to the game. By the end of 2011, the core game of Black Kyurem White 2 was practically complete. Rolling into the new year, Game Freak shifted focus to fine-tuning and finalizing details for the game. By January 11, the developers were still largely relying on the Black and White 1 soundtrack, but just a day later, the bulk of a new BW2 soundtrack was finally added in. On January 18, we got a first look at the earliest iteration of a Black Kyurem White 2 title opening. Surprisingly late in development, considering how central it was to the game. Around the same time, the legendary event scenes were also completed, and just 2 days later, the new Town cutscene featuring the BW1 mother was finally implemented. Before this, there had been no special scene at all, making this one of the last, if not the last, narrative touch added to the game. Then on February 16, the final version of the title sequence was completed. And on February 18, the Professor's introduction cutscene finally received its final design. The end of the month saw the last changes made to the game's 3D cutscenes, effectively wrapping up that side of development. And by March 8, 2012, development on Black Kyurem White 2 was officially complete, just 3 months before the game would release. This graph provided by MD Travis illustrates the full development cycle of BW2, showcasing the number of commits or changes made each month. While compared to the hectic pace of BW1, the sequel's development was a lot more chill, yet it's still incredible they were able to make such an ambitious follow-up while simultaneously laying the groundwork for Pokemon's jump to the 3DS. Just a year later, regardless of how BW2 performed commercially, the games definitely stand out as some of the most creatively daring entries in the series. True sequels that were truly a passion project for Game Freak. And exploring this timeline only deepened my appreciation for just how much love went into these games. And I hope it did the same for you. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.